The room was eerily silent, the air thick with the scent of old books and the lingering traces of cologne. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, stood in front of a large mirror, his eyes red and swollen from crying. His hands trembled as he adjusted the collar of his crisp, white uniform. It was March 24th, 1958, and Elvis was about to become just another private in the U.S. Army. The night before, he had stayed up late, playing gospel songs on his guitar, his voice breaking with every note. His mother, Gladys, had been sick for months, and the thought of leaving her behind was almost too much to bear. But the draft board had spoken, and there was no avoiding the call to duty. Elvis's father, Vernon, stood by the door, his face etched with worry. "You ready, son?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elvis nodded, forcing a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." Outside, a crowd of reporters and photographers waited, their cameras ready to capture every moment. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, was already orchestrating the media circus, making sure every detail was perfect. The last thing Elvis wanted was to be a spectacle, but he knew it was part of the job. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the room. The hallway was filled with well-wishers, friends, and family. His longtime girlfriend, Anita Wood, gave him a quick hug. "You'll be fine," she whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. Elvis nodded, trying to hide his own fear. He had dreamed of a movie career, of becoming a serious actor, but now all of that was on hold. The Army was calling, and he had no choice but to answer. The morning sun was just beginning to rise as Elvis and his entourage arrived at the draft board offices in downtown Memphis. A dozen other young men were already there, their faces pale and nervous. Elvis felt a pang of guilt. He was famous, a star, but he was about to become just like them, a private in the Army. The press was everywhere, their flashbulbs going off like fireworks. Elvis put on his best smile, the one he used for the cameras, and walked into the building. Inside, he and the other inductees were given a series of tests and physical exams. The process was long and tedious, but Elvis tried to stay focused. He knew that once he was in, there would be no turning back. Finally, it was time for the most symbolic moment of the day. Elvis was led to a barber chair, and the Army barber began to cut his hair. The room fell silent as the barber's clippers buzzed, and Elvis's famous pompadour began to disappear. The hair that had made him a star, the hair that had caused so much controversy, was now falling to the floor in clumps. For a moment, Elvis felt naked, vulnerable. When it was done, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. The boyish charm was gone, replaced by the serious, uniformed face of a soldier. He felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. This was his new life, and there was no going back. The press was waiting outside, and Colonel Parker was already handing out promotional materials for Elvis's latest movie, King Creole. Elvis walked out of the building, his new uniform crisp and clean. The crowd erupted in cheers, and the flashbulbs went off again. He felt a wave of dizziness, but he kept walking, his eyes fixed on the bus that would take him to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. As he boarded the bus, he turned to wave one last time. His mother, Gladys, was in the crowd, her face pale and drawn. She gave him a weak smile, and Elvis felt his heart break. He knew he had to be strong for her, for everyone. The bus pulled away, and Elvis watched as Memphis faded into the distance. He was leaving behind everything he knew, everything he loved. But he was also taking a step into the unknown, a step that would define the rest of his life. For the next 2 years, Elvis would be a soldier, just like any other. But he was still the king, and the world was watching. Elvis's life in Germany was a mix of routine, excitement, and personal growth. When he arrived in Friedberg, he was quickly thrown into the life of a soldier. Every morning, he took a taxi to the base, where he performed his duties, which included driving for a sergeant and participating in reconnaissance training. Despite the strict routine, Elvis found time to enjoy himself. He often returned home for lunch and spent most evenings with his friends, playing music and listening to records. On weekends, they played touch football and went on trips to cities like Munich and Paris, where they enjoyed the nightlife and had a lot of fun. Elvis's personal life in Germany was also eventful. He dated several women, including Elizabeth Stefaniak, who moved into the house to help manage his fan mail and other tasks. However, the most significant relationship he formed was with Priscilla Beaulieu, the daughter of an Air Force captain. Priscilla, only 14 at the time, was drawn to Elvis's charm and sensitivity. They spent a lot of time together, and Elvis often talked to her about his mother, his career, and his worries. Priscilla was touched by his vulnerability and felt a deep connection with him. Despite their close bond, Elvis insisted on maintaining a chaste relationship, wanting to keep her pure. Elvis's time in the Army also brought new challenges. He started using amphetamines, which many soldiers took to stay awake during long missions. At first, he used them to stay alert, but soon he began taking them on weekends for fun. His friends, like Rex Mansfield, followed his lead, believing Elvis when he said the drugs were harmless. However, the amphetamines began to affect Elvis's behavior, causing mood swings and making him more unpredictable. Without his mother's stabilizing influence, Elvis's ego sometimes got the best of him, and he started to act more like a celebrity than a regular soldier. His friends and girlfriends had to navigate his changing moods carefully. Family issues also added to the stress. Elvis's father, Vernon, began a relationship with Dee Stanley, the wife of a fellow soldier. This affair was a source of tension for Elvis, who felt it was disrespectful to his mother's memory. Vernon and Dee eventually got married, a decision that Elvis found hard to accept. He visited his mother's grave the day after their wedding, a somber reminder of the loss he still felt. Despite the challenges, Elvis worked hard to maintain his musical skills. He bought a reel-to-reel tape recorder and practiced singing with his friend Charlie Hodge, hoping to improve his range and become a better ballad singer. His manager, Colonel Parker, kept him informed about the latest deals and news through a steady stream of letters and telegrams. This helped Elvis stay connected to his career and feel like an active participant in the decisions being made. Colonel Parker's strategy was to keep Elvis's name in the public eye while he was in the Army. He limited the number of new recordings Elvis had to make for RCA, ensuring that the market wasn't saturated with old material. Instead, RCA reissued Elvis's greatest hits, which continued to sell well. This approach kept Elvis popular and set the stage for his return to civilian life and his career. Elvis's time in Germany was a period of transition. He faced new challenges, formed meaningful relationships, and continued to grow as a person and an artist. When he returned to the United States, he was ready to take his career to the next level, armed with new experiences and a deeper understanding of himself. Elvis Presley's return from the Army in 1960 was a big deal. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had worked hard to keep Elvis in the public eye while he was away, and it paid off. When Elvis came back, he was more popular than ever. On March 2, 1960, Elvis boarded a military plane in Germany and flew to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. A few days later, he arrived at Graceland, his home in Memphis, where a crowd of reporters and photographers waited. Elvis was casual and funny, but he also seemed more mature. He talked about his time in the Army and gave advice to other young men facing military service. He said they should just do their best and not try to be different, because it would only make their time harder. Elvis's return was celebrated by many, including Senator Estes Kefauver, who praised him for serving his country. This positive attention helped Elvis's image. He was no longer seen as just a rebellious rock and roll star, but as a responsible young man who had done his duty. 2 weeks after getting back home, Elvis and his friends traveled to Miami to film a special with Frank Sinatra. This was a big deal because Sinatra was a huge star and had once criticized Elvis, but now Sinatra wanted to welcome him back. The show was a hit, and Elvis performed 2 new songs, Stuck on You and Witchcraft. His duet with Sinatra, where they sang each other's songs, was especially exciting. Elvis proved he could handle sophisticated material, showing his range and talent. After the Sinatra show, Elvis went back to the recording studio. He recorded a bunch of new songs, including Stuck on You, which became a big hit. In April, he recorded even more songs, enough for a whole new album called Elvis is Back. The songs on this album showed how much Elvis had grown as a singer. He recorded ballads, country pop, and blues rock, all with a new depth and skill. One of the most successful songs from this period was It's Now or Never, a remake of an Italian folk song. It became a huge hit and showed off Elvis's improved vocal skills. Another big hit was Are You Lonesome Tonight, which included a recitation that Elvis sang with deep sincerity. These songs, along with others like Surrender, proved that Elvis's fans were still with him, even as he explored new musical styles. Elvis continued to record and release hit after hit. He also made more movies, and the soundtracks to these films, like GI Blues and Blue Hawaii, were incredibly popular. By 1962, Colonel Parker decided that Elvis should focus more on movie soundtracks to avoid flooding the market with too many non-movie songs. Elvis agreed, and this strategy worked well for a while. The soundtrack sold well, and the hit singles from the movies, like Can't Help Falling in Love, encouraged people to see the film. However, as time went on, Elvis started to feel frustrated. Making music was his passion, and he missed the freedom to experiment and create in the studio. By the mid-1960s, he was spending most of his time on movies and less on music. This led to a sense of disappointment, as he felt his artistic growth was being limited. Despite the challenges, Elvis remained a star, and his music continued to captivate audiences. His return from the Army marked a new chapter in his career, one where he was more respected and successful than ever before. But the journey also brought new constraints, as he navigated the demands of fame and the expectations of his fans and management. Elvis Presley's career took a significant turn after his return from the Army. Instead of the vibrant, innovative sessions he once enjoyed, he found himself recording soundtracks that often felt restrictive and formulaic. These soundtracks were designed to fit the plots of movies, and many of the songs were either silly or forgettable. For example, in the film Girls, 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 while Return to Sender became a hit, other songs like Song of the Shrimp were easily overlooked. This shift in material discouraged many talented songwriters from working with Elvis, leading to a decline in the quality and variety of songs submitted by the music publishing company, Hill and Range. Despite the decline in song quality, Elvis tried his best to make the most of what he had. However, the recording process became more of a routine, lacking the passion and dedication he once displayed. By the mid-1960s, he was often recording songs in just one or two takes, a far cry from his earlier, more meticulous approach. Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, also played a significant role in shaping his career. Parker was more interested in limiting the amount of Elvis's product to maintain his mystique and value. This meant fewer live performances and public appearances. Before Elvis's Army service, Parker had numerous offers for concerts and TV appearances, but he rejected most of them. Even after Elvis returned to the U.S., the demands of making multiple movies and recording soundtracks left little time for tours. However, Elvis did perform in a few benefit concerts, which were hugely successful. For instance, in December 1960, he performed at the Ellis Auditorium in Memphis, raising over $50,000 for local charities. Another benefit concert in Honolulu, where he was filming Blue Hawaii, was equally electrifying, showing that Elvis could still captivate a live audience. Parker and Elvis believed that movies were the future, both financially and artistically. Elvis was eager to develop his skills as a dramatic actor, and Parker lined up several film projects to help him do so. However, the first post-Army film, GI Blues, was more of a musical comedy than a serious drama. Though it was a box office success, the movie and its soundtrack were forgettable. Elvis expressed his dissatisfaction with some of the songs and scenes, but both Parker and the producers insisted that this type of family entertainment was the best direction for him. Elvis's next film, Flaming Star, was a more serious western where he played a half-breed caught between two worlds. The role was originally intended for Marlon Brando, and the director, Don Siegel, was disappointed when Elvis took the part. Elvis felt insecure on set, and his performance was stiff. The movie did not meet expectations at the box office, which reinforced Parker's belief that Elvis should stick to lighter, more commercial films. Wild in the Country was another attempt at a more serious role. Based on a critically acclaimed novel and directed by Philip Dunn, the film had potential, but studio executives and Parker insisted on including more musical numbers and silly scenes. Elvis felt the changes compromised the film, and his performance suffered. He muttered to a co-star, "God, this is so embarrassing. Nobody would ever do this in real life. Why are they making me do this? Despite his reservations, Elvis did not push back, and the film was a relative flop. These experiences increased Elvis's insecurity in Hollywood. He often relied on his friends for support, which led to a less focused attitude on set. He was also using amphetamines to keep up with his demanding schedule, which affected his performance and behavior. Despite these challenges, Elvis's charisma and charm still shone through in his more lighthearted films, like Blue Hawaii. Directed by Norman Taurog, who had a good rapport with Elvis, Blue Hawaii was a box office success and showcased Elvis's mature, charismatic appeal to his growing adult fan base. In the end, Elvis's movie career was a mix of successes and disappointments. While he found success in musical comedies, his attempts at more serious roles were often hindered by external pressures and his own insecurities. Despite these challenges, Elvis remained a beloved and bankable star, but the path to becoming a serious actor was fraught with obstacles. Elvis Presley's career took a significant turn with the release of Blue Hawaii in 1961. Before this, his films were a mixed bag with no clear pattern. However, Blue Hawaii was different. It was a massive hit, and it set a new formula for Elvis's movies. These films were typically set in exotic locations like Las Vegas, Acapulco, or Florida, and Elvis played exciting characters: pilots, race car drivers, rodeo riders, and prize-fighters. Each movie included attractive women, romance, action, and of course, Elvis's music. Elvis's earlier attempts at more serious roles, like Flaming Star and Wild in the Country, didn't do as well at the box office. This led Elvis and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, to focus on the formula that worked: movies that were easy to make and guaranteed box office success. Despite this, Elvis sometimes felt frustrated. He wanted to be taken seriously as an actor and explore different types of roles, but the pressure to stick with what worked was too strong. One of the few times Elvis seemed genuinely engaged in a film was Viva Las Vegas in 1963. He had a passionate off-screen relationship with co-star Anne Margaret, and this chemistry brought out the best in his performance. The musical numbers were particularly strong, and Elvis seemed to be having fun. However, Colonel Parker was wary of letting anyone else share the spotlight with Elvis, and this led to even more formulaic movies in the years that followed. To cut costs, Parker signed a deal with Sam Katzman, a producer known for making movies quickly and cheaply. Katzman's approach meant that Elvis's films became even more formulaic and lower in quality. The scripts were often absurd, the songs forgettable, and the production values shoddy. Despite this, the movies still made money, thanks to Elvis's loyal fan base and the economies in production. Elvis's income from these films actually increased, even as the quality declined. In 1962, he made over $900,000 from movies, and by 1967, his income from films had risen to $2,700,000. This easy money allowed Elvis to live a lavish lifestyle, but it also meant he was stuck in a rut. He began to feel disillusioned, especially when he realized that the revenue from his films was helping to finance more serious movies that he could never be a part of. Elvis and Parker's relationship became strained. Elvis felt that Parker was out of touch with the changing music scene, and their arguments grew more heated. However, despite their disagreements, they always managed to reconcile. Elvis was comfortable letting Parker handle the business side of things, even if it meant making decisions he might not have agreed with. By 1966, Parker was also concerned about Elvis's declining popularity. To secure his own financial future, he renegotiated their partnership agreement. Under the new terms, Parker would receive a 25% management fee and a 50% share of any profits Elvis earned. This made Parker even more influential, but it also reflected the challenges they both faced in a rapidly changing entertainment industry. Elvis's personal life also began to affect his work. He was no longer as committed to his movies, and Parker found himself having to make excuses for his client. Elvis's entourage, which included friends like Joe Esposito, Marty Lacker, and Jerry Schilling, was always with him. They traveled together, lived together, and provided a constant source of companionship. However, this close-knit group also meant that Elvis was less likely to push himself or take on new challenges. By the mid-1960s, Elvis's film career was in a rut, and he was increasingly frustrated. The formula that had once made him a star was now a trap, and he was struggling to find a way out. Despite the success and the money, Elvis knew that he was capable of more, and the seeds of his dissatisfaction were growing. Elvis's life in Los Angeles was a wild, non-stop party. Fueled by amphetamines, he and his friends, known as the Memphis Mafia, hosted extravagant gatherings at his Bel Air home. With their girlfriends and wives back in Memphis, they invited scores of attractive women, many of whom were groupies waiting outside the house, eager to meet Elvis. Hollywood stars attended these parties too, but they were often outnumbered by the women. Elvis served liquor, though he still refused to use marijuana or hard drugs, and guests who indulged had to do so out of his sight. The parties were so wild that Elvis even had a two-way mirror installed in the cabana, allowing him and his friends to watch women change into their swimsuits. When they weren't partying, Elvis and the guys played touch football in local parks, often against teams of young actors like Gary Crosby, Pat Boone, and Ricky Nelson. Elvis always played quarterback, and his team included friends like Max Baer Jr., the star of the Beverly Hillbillies. They also rode motorcycles through the canyons of Beverly Hills and practiced karate, showing off their moves to party guests and studio people. Road trips to Las Vegas were a regular affair, where they stayed up for days, partying with strippers and showgirls, and exuded a cool, masculine vibe that earned them the nickname Memphis Mafia. Back in Memphis, Graceland transformed into a place of wild abandon. With his mother Gladys no longer around and his father Viernernen living in a separate house, Elvis's grandmother Minnie was the only adult presence, but she mostly kept to herself. The atmosphere at Graceland became more like a frat house, with Elvis and his friends inviting women, who gathered at the gates to join them inside. He still had steady girlfriends, like Anita Wood, but this didn't stop him from consorting with others. They rented movie theaters, roller rinks, and the local amusement park for private use, but most of the time they stayed at Graceland, singing gospel songs, watching football, practicing karate, and playing with the elaborate stock car track Elvis had installed. Elvis's relationship with his entourage was complex. They were his friends and buddies, but they also performed various tasks for him, from running errands to managing his cars and motorcycles. For years, Elvis didn't pay them salaries, only covering their living expenses, which caused financial strain for some. When this was pointed out, he put them on the payroll and formalized their roles. However, their dependence on him led to sycophantic behavior and jealousy within the group. Joe Esposito, the foreman in charge of expenses, was particularly resented for trying to form an inner circle around Elvis. Lamar Fike, a longtime friend, was often teased by the others, which he usually took in stride but sometimes hurt him deeply. Elvis's increasing drug use made him more unpredictable. He fired members of the group for minor mistakes and had temper tantrums when things didn't go his way. These outbursts were often followed by generous gestures, like offering cars or down payments on houses. The guys learned to be cautious around him, following unwritten rules to stay in his good graces. Despite the good times, there were always doubts in Elvis's mind about why they were there, a common fear among celebrities. Vernon, who managed Elvis's personal finances, grew increasingly anxious as the expenses mounted. He resented the entourage spending and feared they were leeches. In 1966, Elvis's interest in horseback riding led him to buy a 160-acre ranch in northern Mississippi, the Circle G, where he and the guys could live in a pseudo-Western commune. However, by mid-1967, Elvis had lost interest, and Vernon began selling off the ranch's assets to avoid bankruptcy. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, initially tolerated Elvis's excesses, but became concerned as Elvis's appearance and attitude changed. He gained weight and had to go on crash diets for his movies. His attitude on set became lackluster, and movie producers started complaining. Parker tried to understand the entourage role, seeing it as a way to keep Elvis comfortable in Hollywood and limit his contact with others who might undermine the Colonel's influence. However, by 1964, Parker began to worry as Elvis's mind was no longer on his work. Elvis's new interest in spiritualism began when he met Larry Geller, a Hollywood hairdresser who introduced him to New Age spiritual books. Elvis was fascinated and hired Geller to work for him full-time. They read books like The Impersonal Life and Autobiography of a Yogi, and Elvis even built a meditation garden at Graceland. He considered quitting show business to become a monk, after a religious experience in the Arizona desert. This new interest upset the guys, who resented Geller and the end of their wild parties. Elvis badgered them to join his spiritual journey, but they showed little interest, and he withdrew, forming a closer bond with Geller. Parker distrusted Geller and feared he was brainwashing Elvis. With Elvis's energies directed away from show business, Parker felt galled. The guys shared their concerns with the Colonel, but with Vernon, the guys, and Parker all having limited influence over Elvis, they struggled to find a solution. Elvis and Priscilla's relationship was a unique blend of love, ambition, and the complexities of fame. After Elvis returned from Germany, he and Priscilla, the girl he had met and grown close to, stayed in touch. Despite his busy life in Hollywood, Elvis was drawn to Priscilla's youth and her willingness to be exactly what he wanted. She was different from the other women in his life. Unlike the starlets and Anita Wood, Priscilla was completely devoted to him. She even convinced her parents to let her move to Memphis to be with Elvis, where she lived with his parents, Vernon and Dee. Priscilla's presence in Elvis's life brought a sense of stability and intimacy that he hadn't experienced before. They created their own private world at Graceland, and when Elvis was in town, they spent most of their time together. However, their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Priscilla was upset when she read about Elvis's alleged affairs in the gossip columns, and she pushed for more involvement in his life, including visits to Los Angeles. In 1966, they even rented a new house to have more privacy. Elvis's spiritual journey was another source of tension. He introduced Priscilla to his spiritual studies, but she found it difficult to connect with his newfound interests. This frustration led her to see Larry Geller, Elvis's spiritual advisor, as a threat. The situation came to a head when Elvis slipped in the bathroom and sustained a concussion while filming a movie. His manager, Colonel Parker, used this incident to intervene and limit Elvis's spiritual activities, which helped to ease some of the tension. In March 1967, Elvis and Priscilla's relationship reached a new milestone when they got married in Las Vegas. The wedding was a small, secretive event, and only a few close friends were invited. Despite some initial backlash from Elvis's entourage, the marriage seemed to bring stability to Elvis's life. When Priscilla became pregnant shortly after the wedding, Elvis was overjoyed, and their relationship grew even stronger. However, the honeymoon phase didn't last long. Elvis's career demands and his lingering spiritual yearnings began to take a toll. He was still influenced by his spiritual journey, even though he had stopped talking about it openly. The arrival of their daughter, Lisa Marie, in 1968 brought new challenges. While Elvis was thrilled to be a father, the demands of his career and his inner struggles made it difficult to maintain the close bond he and Priscilla had once shared. The Beatles' visit in 1965 highlighted the changing landscape of the music industry. While Elvis was busy making movies, the Beatles were redefining pop culture with their innovative music and films. Their visit to Elvis's home was a mix of excitement and disappointment. The Beatles were eager to connect with Elvis, who had been a major influence on them, but they noticed that Elvis seemed disconnected and uninterested. The meeting was a wake-up call for Elvis, who realized that his career trajectory was different from what he had hoped for. By 1965, Elvis's film career was not as successful as it had been, and he was frustrated with the types of roles he was getting. The pressure to make money and the lack of creative fulfillment left him feeling stagnant. The Beatles' success only underscored his own dissatisfaction. Despite the challenges, Elvis and Priscilla continued to navigate their relationship, trying to find a balance between their personal lives and the demands of fame. By the mid-1960s, Elvis Presley's star was dimming in the world of popular music. His singles, which once dominated the charts, were now barely making a splash. Songs like I'm Yours and the soundtrack to Tickle Me failed to capture the energy and innovation of the new rock and roll scene. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Bob Dylan were the new kings of the charts, creating music that was more complex and sophisticated. These artists were pushing the boundaries of what rock and roll could be, and their fans were hungry for something fresh and daring. Elvis, on the other hand, was seen as a relic of the past. His music, often recorded years earlier or from movie soundtracks, lacked the verve and excitement of the new hits. His audience was shrinking to a core group of loyal fans, mostly older women who had loved him in his heyday. For the younger generation, Elvis was a distant memory, a symbol of a bygone era. Elvis himself was troubled by these changes. He felt threatened by the Beatles' success and their artistic freedom. He resented their willingness to take risks and experiment, something he was not inclined to do. Elvis was a child of the working-class South, where music was a way to bring people together, not a platform for individual expression. He loved all kinds of music, and couldn't understand the new emphasis on authenticity and artistic growth. To him, success was measured by public acceptance and his ability to please his fans. Despite his discomfort, Elvis was curious about the new music. He enjoyed the folk sounds of Peter, Paul, and Mary and Odetta, and he became a fan of Simon and Garfunkel. He even started to appreciate some of Bob Dylan's songs, though he didn't care for Dylan's voice. By early 1966, Elvis was ready to try something new. He wanted to get back into the studio and record non-soundtrack material. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, was on board. He knew that Elvis needed a new challenge to reignite his passion for music. They scheduled a recording session in Nashville, and Elvis began preparing by listening to new songs and working with his friends to choose the best material. When they arrived at the studio, they met Felton Jarvis, a young producer who was also a big Elvis fan. Jarvis and Elvis hit it off immediately, and Jarvis understood what Elvis needed to make his music exciting again. The sessions with Jarvis were a turning point. Elvis worked harder than he had in years, experimenting with gospel, R&B, and countrified pop. He recorded a heartfelt version of Bob Dylan's Tomorrow is a Long Time, and several ballads, including Love Letters and Indescribably Blue. These songs showed that Elvis still had the talent and the passion, but they didn't perform well on the charts. Love Letters reached only No. 19, and Indescribably Blue peaked at No. 33. In September 1967, Elvis returned to Nashville with a renewed sense of purpose. He was determined to cover Jerry Reed's Guitar Man, and Jarvis brought Reed into the studio to help get the right sound. The session produced several strong R&B inspired songs, and U.S. Mail made it to the top 30. Although these songs didn't have the commercial success Elvis hoped for, they were an artistic triumph, showing that he could still make music that was hot and energetic. By early 1968, however, Elvis's new singles were struggling to get airplay. His audience remained largely the same die-hard fans, who would buy anything he released. For the younger generation, Elvis was still a historical figure, remembered for his movies and the forgettable soundtracks that came with them. Despite his efforts, Elvis found it hard to connect with the new wave of music fans who were looking for something different, something that spoke to their own experiences and ideals. Elvis Presley's journey in the music business was a story of highs and lows, of trying to stay relevant in a rapidly changing world. In the end, he remained a beloved icon, but the world of rock and roll had moved on, and Elvis was left behind. His legacy, however, would live on, a testament to the power of his music and the indelible mark he left on the world of popular culture.